Let's stop treating this as confusion or coincidence. What has resurfaced in recent months through archived communications, testimony references, and long suppressed allegations is not a random internet theory. It is a pattern of unanswered questions that powerful institutions have consistently refused to confront directly. The controversy does not begin with a wedding, a title, or a public image. It begins years earlier in private social ecosystems most people never see. The uncomfortable suggestion raised by researchers and independent analysts is not that Meghan Markle accidentally entered royal life, but that she moved within elite networks long before her relationship with Prince Harry became public, and that some of those networks later became deeply problematic for the British establishment. What alarms critics is not a single name or association, but timing. Specifically, the sudden appearance of her name in elite correspondence beginning around 2016, a year that coincides with two pivotal developments: her public connection to Prince Harry and heightened scrutiny of figures linked to Jeffrey Epstein. This matters because power doesn't operate loudly, it operates selectively. Before 2015, Meghan Markle appeared rarely in elite documentation of influence. She attended events, yes, but she was not a central figure. She was listed as a guest, not a connector. That distinction matters in elite circles because individuals without leverage are not protected, erased, or strategically managed. Then, something changed. By 2016, her visibility inside high-level communications increased sharply. Analysts tracking metadata patterns, not content, but frequency and proximity, have noted that her name begins to appear alongside individuals tied to wealth, access, and gatekeeping power. This does not prove wrongdoing, but it contradicts the idea that she entered royal proximity as an unknown outsider. And that contradiction is where the story becomes uncomfortable. The moment Prince Harry publicly confirmed the relationship, Meghan Markle's profile shifted overnight, not socially, but strategically. From that point forward, she was no longer simply an actress or public figure, she was connected to the monarchy itself. In elite systems, that kind of connection transforms a person into a liability or an asset. Observers argue that this is when institutional behavior changes. One example, often cited, is a February 2017 trip to Jamaica. Publicly, it was framed as attendance at a wedding. Privately, the logistics raised eyebrows. Prince Harry reportedly traveled commercially, while Meghan Markle traveled via private aircraft allegedly linked to billionaire circles. In elite culture, private aviation is rarely generosity, it is alignment. From that point onward, analysts suggest she was no longer navigating social spaces independently, she was being supported, shielded, and moved. Why does this matter? Because institutions do not invest unless they are managing risk. The deeper concern raised by independent investigators is not about celebrity networking, it's about overlap. Names tied to elite yachting culture, private island access, and closed social circuits repeatedly surface in proximity to each other. No single name proves anything, but repeated proximity forms patterns. And patterns are where institutions become nervous. This is also where the role of silence becomes central. Mainstream media outlets have largely avoided exploring these overlaps, not because they are conclusively false, but because following them would lead directly into territory involving not just individuals, but institutions. When journalism stops asking questions, it's rarely because answers don't exist, it's because consequences do. This brings us to testimony that independent researchers consider the most sensitive part of the story. In public records and interviews, Giuffre has named individuals she described as witnesses within Epstein's broader social environment. Some claims remain disputed, others were never fully examined. What matters is not the allegation itself, but the institutional response. When claims threaten to entangle monarchy-adjacent figures, investigation slows, coverage narrows, language softens, silence expands. This is why Prince Andrew's scandal is relevant but not central. His case functions as a boundary marker, an example of how far exposure is allowed to go and where it stops. According to analysts, the royal institution did not fail to act out of ignorance, but out of calculation. The critical question becomes, if a person's past contains information that could destabilize multiple power centers, is exposure avoided to protect the individual or the system? By the time Meghan Markle entered the royal family publicly, critics argued that too many variables were already in motion. Containment, not discovery, became the priority. And containment does not require innocence. It requires leverage. At a certain point, this discussion stops being about one individual. It becomes about how institutions respond when exposure threatens their foundations. Researchers examining archived communications have noted something striking. The most concerning references do not appear before Meghan Markle's connection to Prince Harry. They appear afterward, and they cease around the time Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in 2019. This timeline matters. If communications had existed years earlier, they could be dismissed as coincidence. If they appeared after, they suggest reaction. Analysts argue that what these references indicate is not origin, but protection. You do not need hundreds of documents to establish proximity. In elite systems, even a few confirmations are enough to change behavior. This is why attention has focused on alleged correspondence involving figures adjacent to both Epstein and the royal family. Reports suggest that Sarah Ferguson, former Duchess of York, had familiarity with Meghan Markle years before her public royal introduction. That alone is not suspicious, but when combined with the broader context, it raises questions about how new Meghan Markle truly was to royal circles. The deeper issue is risk management. Once Epstein became a global liability, anyone with even indirect proximity became a potential threat. Institutions do not respond by uncovering truth. They respond by minimizing exposure. This explains why mainstream media coverage remains cautious. Investigating these overlaps would require acknowledging that systems designed to protect reputations may have done so at the expense of transparency. Critics often ask why journalists don't pursue these stories. The answer may be simpler than conspiracy. Following the trail would not end with a duchess. It would move upward toward donors, intermediaries, and power brokers. At that point, journalism becomes institutional confrontation. This also reframes the palace's response to Meghan Markle's relationship with Prince Harry. Instead of opposition, there was accommodation. Instead of scrutiny, there was acceleration. Instead of investigation, there was narrative construction. From a risk perspective, this makes sense. If exposure threatens to implicate multiple figures across finance, politics, and monarchy, containment becomes preferable to conflict. Silence becomes strategy. Emails don't need to accuse to be dangerous. They only need to confirm access. And access is what institutions fear most when scandal looms. The reason the story refuses to disappear is not because it has been proven, but because it has never been conclusively addressed. No full denials, no comprehensive disclosures, no independent verification that would end speculation entirely. That absence is what fuels scrutiny. This is not about personal dislike or royal fandom. It is about how power behaves when transparency becomes dangerous. It is about why some stories are debated endlessly, while others are quietly avoided. History shows that institutions rarely panic over rumors. They panic over records. As more archives are examined and more testimonies revisited, the pressure does not come from outrage, but from accumulation. Patterns resurface, timelines realign. Silence becomes harder to maintain. Whether every allegation proves accurate is ultimately less important than this reality. Once questions reach institutional levels, they do not disappear. They wait. And when silence finally breaks, it is rarely gentle.